Welcome back to CMS-Connected, everyone. I'm Tyler Piber, and time for the CMS Insider, and the headline reads, DCG research shows higher education institutions at risk with slow shift to customer experience management. Now, the analysis based on the original research conducted by DCG indicates that delivering experiences to education customers rather than publishing content remains aspirational for institutions in the United States and the UK, saying, quote, web managers, content strategists, marketers, and leaders know they should be doing more to engage prospective and current students who are among the most digitally sophisticated audience, said Marianne Kay with DCG. But many teams are overwhelmed by the everyday tasks associated with maintaining their university's current web presence. They find it difficult to evolve from content publishing to digital storytelling. So Scott, kind of give me your quick overview on this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So Marianne was one of the lead analysts on this, and we undertook a pretty long, it was about 6 months, I think, of a research study to basically interviewing lots of organizations, institutions in both the US and the UK, and we really wanted to uncover a few things. Number one, I think we really wanted to get kind of what are the current state of content management practices in these institutions. Two, how are they evolving, like you said, from web publishing to really experience management? How are they making that shift? Three is, what are some of those obstacles that are actually preventing them from making the shift? Because there are plenty, and many of which are cultural in nature, something certainly that those in higher ed are very, very familiar with. And then four is, how can they, we talked earlier on the show with Liewehr about that notion of digital transformation, and how are these organizations both gauging their progress towards digitally transforming, as well as really how can they know if they are, and how can they go about that process? How can they basically map that roadmap for themselves in terms of making that transformation?
Well, let's go through some of the takeaways. There are basically 6 different takeaways. I'll start with the very first one, and that's delivering an experience as aspirational, as I just mentioned a few seconds ago. Talk about that, the aspirations of it all.
Yeah, I think, basically it says that to be able to take this on holistically is aspirational for them, more so than a real reality. And most of that because it's not because there's not a lack of trying. It is the fact that just institutionally these organizations are extremely decentralized. So there's lots and lots of content managed by lots and lots of folks around an institution, and they're not all necessarily on the same page in terms of making sure that they want to present, like, what is consistent? Consistent experience for whom? Is it for the college of this, the college of that, this particular department's audience? Is it an internal audience, an external audience? Becomes very difficult. So culturally is the kind of the biggest stumbling block here, more so, and so that affects the people, the process, the technology. Technology's there, just very difficult culturally for them to make this.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to touch on all of those in just a second. Now, talk about the content demand right now, because that's one thing that seems to be happening is that institutions seem to be struggling with the overall content demand. I mean, we see it with regular traditional, say, publishing agencies, but universities struggling with this.
They really are, and I think there's a huge volume of content. Everything from, I mean, we've worked with large organizations, with Carnegie Mellon, with many others who, one after the other, they all struggle with the exact same thing. Lots and lots of content, very few people, very few resources, and many of them are transient in terms of those who are actually going to be publishing that content, right? So you think about a particular department, they might have a student in now who has to get up and running on how to be able to go about doing this, and they struggle being able to take over the new helm, or they're not as committed to it as maybe the last one was. So you see these kind of waves. Again, you see varying notions of consistency from one department to the next, from one school to the next. Web governance is a really big issue here. Shout out to Lisa Welchman, who is kind of the primo. She's been on the show a couple of times, although she quickly reminds me that she's not on often enough. But they could really use her help in terms of from a web governance standpoint, because trying to figure out who owns what content, who's going to publish, stop and go, all of that is a really difficult thing for these guys.
And that goes into kind of the next point of the pockets, I guess, a school within a school. So the University of Massachusetts School of Law. So the ones that do it well seem to be working in pockets. And I think that's kind of the next takeaway, really.
That's true. So what they're finding here is that while there is some progress, but that progress does come in chunks. And so you go from kind of one department, it might have somebody who's near the top of it who really embraces the notion of digital and really wants to kind of get them out at the forefront. And so you'll see this happening at that department level, at that school level, at that portion of the school. You can see some of that progress, but you very rarely see that actually transcend from one group to the next group because they're very much on different pages. You just don't have, I think, again, there's both a cultural thing, but there's also just the organizational kind of fiefdoms that exist make it such that you just you don't get consensus across at the top.
All right, let's go and let's talk about actually the agencies themselves that are there to help them, whether it's the integration, whether it's the actual publishing. They aren't really being used. They're almost underutilized in a sense, aren't they?
It's very true. There are lots of agencies, systems integrators out there who can help them, but what ends up happening is those guys are really undervalued and really underutilized. Oftentimes they have the chops, they have the capabilities to basically be able to help them through this, but they just don't get used. So they end up working kind of, again, at that department level, at that school level, and even though they often come in with ideas of grandeur, so to speak, where they basically might even be hired in to come in and help with some very, very large project, or let's come in and even find a technology that's going to work across the entire school. Next thing you know, it gets isolated down to, okay, we're just going to work with this particular group. And that's really too bad because there's an awful lot of expertise out there, but I think you'll find that many of those agencies are very frustrated at the impact that they've been able to have because of the nuances of higher ed.
So the people that are there, I mean, you talk about the people that know this, the agencies are there. What about the technology? Talk about that. Is the technology there right now?
It's a very good question because I think, counter to some, there are certainly some industries where things like, if you look at media and entertainment, where one could criticize the technology landscape and say that the technology isn't really there to basically be able to make this happen. You find a lot of those in media and entertainment basically going and building their own solutions because some of those out-of-the-box capabilities are just not up to par for them. We found that in institutions of higher ed, certainly those technology capabilities are there. Quite frankly, they're fairly, the capabilities that they're using of the technology they have are fairly minimal, right? They're just not even taking full advantage of it. Things like workflow to be able to help with some of that, overcome some of those cultural challenges, and the governance notions would be able to maybe help them through that, but they're not even utilizing that. So the technology is there. It's just, and in fact, not only is it there, there are actually plenty of vertically focused solutions that actually really try to target higher ed from the content management space to try to kind of meet their needs. And so in fact, they are there, the technology is there, but they're just not making use of it.
Right, the last point that we want to talk about here is that kind of that tipping point for the universities, because at the end of the day, if enrollment's not there and they're not bringing in money, are they going to be saying, oh, I need more resources to create all this content? I mean, what's the tipping point really?
We talked earlier on the show about saying to Microsoft, welcome to 2010, and we said that because they were just going and kind of creating mobile finally in SharePoint, and the reason that I said they were able to kind of stay so far behind the curve there was because they had an audience that was engaged with them that couldn't really leave, right? They had, the barrier to exit was really high. I think same thing in higher ed is they are spoiled at the fact that enrollments are actually only growing year over year across the board at every institution. And quite frankly, it's not until they start to see enrollments decline, it's not until they start to see those kind of more attractive students looking at other institutions and taking their business elsewhere that I think that they're going to actually make a push for this. And so it's kind of a sad state that we're so reactive in academia, where you should kind of be on the forefront. They find themselves really on the back burner, not on the forefront, trying to catch up, because this just isn't a priority. And I think sometimes those cultural cultural barriers are too hard to overcome. I do want to say though, for those who want to go and download the study, this is not just kind of more for those who are in higher institutions. One of our most popular downloaded tools. We've had a lot of registrations just because of this. Our content is all free, but it's not just kind of telling you what you already know, but it actually is going to be able to give you some real insights into how you can make progress, albeit in small chunks, and how you can kind of get your ideas for your own group be able to spread across that institution.
Definitely. Make sure you follow CMS Connected on Twitter, you follow DCG on Twitter, because you guys are obviously sending it out so folks can go ahead and try to download.